Shalom, and welcome to my channel, which I hope to use to provide information about Jews, promote critical thinking, and debunk conspiracy theories. Recently, Christian pastor Rick Wiles used his website and his YouTube channel to disseminate the idea that the impeachment inquiry into Trump is a Jew coup. This is just one of scores of recent examples of anti-Semitic rhetoric reaching an audience that would not have tuned into such screeds 10 years ago. If you have never been inside a fundamentalist or evangelical milieu, or even if you have, it might be difficult to understand how anyone could deem Wiles credible. I hope this video goes some way towards explaining the process by which that happens. My name is Veronica. I am Jewish, and I am a former far-right conspiracy theorist. Perhaps you have seen other videos from people formerly on the far right or the alt-right. But there is at least one significant respect in which my story differs from any I have seen on YouTube. I was radicalized in the 1990s. I think it is worth taking a look at the respects in which the process has changed dramatically, and the respects in which it has stayed more or less the same. The radicalization process is sometimes visualized as a pyramid in which people start in a broad group of people represented by the base of the pyramid and find themselves in smaller groups as their viewpoints become more fringe. Some people prefer to speak of a funnel. Or you might read about people being funneled into extremist groups. That is essentially the same metaphor viewed from a different perspective. For me, the base of the pyramid was funagelical Christianity. And I use the portmanteau funagelical not only because it is a handy catch-all for fundamentalist and evangelical Christianity, but also because I often went to an independent Baptist church with a friend, even while belonging to a Pentecostal congregation. My views were being shaped by multiple, albeit similar currents within Christianity. In the 1990s, many of the conspiracy theories that are now commonplace in right-wing forums had not yet gained a footing in the funagelical churches closest to the mainstream. Some did not yet exist. There was no movement claiming that vaccines caused autism, for example. But at the core of my and many other fundagelicals' beliefs, there was a sort of conspiracy theory framework. We believed that a mainstream viewpoint was to be dismissed if it conflicted with our deeply held beliefs. A quintessential example of this was the theory of evolution. At least some of us understood that it was absurd to think that the vast majority of relevant authorities could have surveyed the world around them long enough to get a PhD in biology and still converge on an entirely wrong conclusion about the origin of the diversity of life. So it became necessary to believe that some people, perhaps biologists themselves, were suppressing the evidence of a divine creator or grossly misrepresenting the evidence used to confirm the common ancestry of species. So perhaps it comes as no surprise that if someone had told us that they were a Christian who accepted the theory of evolution, we would have said that they were not really Christian. All this is to say that even in the broad base that included Baptist and Pentecostal churches, I was being acclimated to the idea that believing the right thing required being ideologically separated from other people, even other Christians, and for me the only major obstacle to falling further down the funnel was a lack of exposure. Thanks to recent iterations of the YouTube algorithm, the far right of today has garnered the views of unsuspecting people who at first watched videos with themes that are most tenuously linked to the far right, gaming, for example. But I began my descent down the far-right funnel around 1993, a time before YouTube. I got my start when it became apparent that my mother did not like the secular music I had been listening to, and I turned the radio dial to a Christian station. I liked to learn about current events. I was the only 14-year-old I knew with a subscription to Time, so I quickly took an interest in a talk show called Point of View. On a typical episode, the host, Marlon Maddox, would put a conservative Christian spin on the news and interview a guest. One day the guest was Tex Mars, who died within the past month incidentally, and I asked my parents to buy me a copy of Dark Majesty, the book he was promoting. And in the book I learned about Mars's free newsletter, Flashpoint. In retrospect, Flashpoint seems to have served the roles that would later be served by Mars's website. The newsletter was short, 4 pages if I remember correctly, so relatively inexpensive to publish. And through it, Mars was able to promote books and cassettes that he and other right-wing conspiracy theorists had produced. While Maddox was no angel, here is the cover of a book he co-authored around the time I started listening, the content of Flashpoint and Mars's books were more conservative and more fringe. At the time, that made them more intriguing to me. If you look at Mars's website today, it will not take you long to identify Mars's fixation. Mars had a virulent, pervasive hate of Jews. But when I was still Mars's avid follower, his anti-Semitism, if it already existed, was not evident to me. That said, Mars did like to weave conspiracy theories involving secret societies and shadowy figures who control the world. Though I had not learned enough about historical anti-Semitism to see it at the time, his ideas had the shape of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, even if he had yet to populate his imagined clandestine organizations with Jews. For me, the beginning of the end came around 1994 when I received an issue of Flashpoint that contained an advertisement for a book entitled New Age Bible Versions by Gail Ripplinger. Ripplinger was the voice of the King James Only movement, which claims that the King James Version is superior to modern translations of the Christian Bible. Ripplinger was a trailblazer of sorts in that she took the King James Only movement into previously unseen conspiracy theory territory, alleging that modern translations are the product of a crew led by the devil himself. I bought into this and started inflicting Ripplinger's message on the Christians around me. As you might have guessed, evangelicals did not like to hear that the Bibles they carried to church on Sunday were inspired by the devil. Some of them were quite aggressive in their response. If you know anything about evangelical Christianity, you know that was the wrong move. Remember that my beliefs hinged on a evangelical Christian framework, and if people, even Christians, were aggressive toward me, I saw that as a confirmation of my beliefs, just as they would have taken it as a confirmation of their beliefs if a liberal Christian had been aggressive in challenging them. Fortunately, I had at least one epistemic virtue. I had the intellectual courage to read arguments against what I believed, if they were presented by Christians anyway, and I learned of a book entitled The King James Only Controversy, written by James R. White, a fundamentalist theologian. I was pretty resistant when I first read it, but part of it stuck with me, namely that White said the King James Only movement's arguments were rooted in circular reasoning. And that was a pivotal moment, because instead of accepting the words of the evangelical Christians whose works I read most recently as gospel truth, I started to think critically about everything I read. And if I was going to have to eat some humble pie, New Age Bible Versions was a great pie to cut my teeth on. I could turn to almost any page, fact-check it, see for myself what Ripplinger had gotten wrong, and then tell others what I had found. That was just the start for me, but I will save the rest of my story for later. Thank you for watching my video. And now I have a question for you. Have you ever believed in a conspiracy theory? And if you have, how did you discover it was wrong? Let me know in the comments below. I hope to publish another video in 3 weeks, so please consider subscribing and hitting the bell to be notified of my latest content. Lahit Ra'ot!